Hello, and welcome to Chess Comedy Books 51. I thought I'd do a little thing on my books, which I've written. They're all fairly small, but they nevertheless are publications I've taken quite some time over, and there's three of them. All of these were before I became editor of the British Chess magazine with John Upham and Sean Talbot. So perhaps I had more get up and go in those days than I do now. First I want to look at is this, loss of time and space. This is a quotation from Tartakova, not a very well-known quotation, I admit. And in his book, Breviary of Chess, which is absolutely appalling book, I think, he mentions 2 knight g8 in the Alekhine defense. If you're in any doubt what that is, well, get out a chessboard, and it's the king pawn coming forward, the knight coming out for black, then pushing e5, and then instead of playing knight d5, which is the normal move at move 2, you play knight g8. And so far as I can be aware, this is the only book ever written on that subject. Well, in fact, it was worth a book. Oh, it's a small one. I don't know. That will convey to you something of the flavour there. I managed in those days, I was in contact with quite a few people. I wrote this in 2003, but it was a very great deal of time later that I finally got around to publishing it. I found it in my desk and thought, my first thought being me was, there must be something wrong with it, otherwise I'd have published it at the time. Just have a little drink. But I couldn't spot anything wrong with it, to be honest. Hang on. No, I couldn't spot anything wrong with it. Anyway, to my delight, it went to Andrew Martin had done, I don't know, it was one of his tapes or something. I can't remember now, but he had done some work on this system and played it himself. It says, loss of time and space will cover 20 plus games. The first work on this defense, a new portal of the 21st century with transposition and counterattack, crouch hoof in mouth behind every variation. It's hard to believe it, but I did put in an immense amount of work. This was called the Brooklyn defense because it was played by Joel Benjamin, the US Grandmaster, and Eric Schiller called it that in his book, which was Unorthodox Openings, which Hugh Myers, my very dear friend, pen friend, disliked so intensely. I don't think his dislike extended that far to Joel, but it did to the late Eric. And I think that's a shame, but I also think it was an inevitability, because I think that he was a thwarted player in a way, because he lived in such disparate areas in his life. If you look at the bibliography that I quote, it's fairly detailed, and I did rake in quite a few people to help, including Otto Hardy and Gerard Welling, and Basman liked it very much. And when he looked through this, I didn't force it on him. I had it with me when I was we were having supper, him and quite a lot of the other guys, and he said he'd like to reprint it. Unfortunately, due to a slight indiscretion on his part, we were unable to agree terms. Nevertheless, the book was not spoilt as a result of that, just for my day. And here are examples of the games which I show. I asked a question online of, I can't remember what it was, a very, very obscure aspect of the game. And with speed of light, I was asleep. And then in the morning, 3 people had answered, 2 of whom gave me pieces of information I hadn't got. And it suddenly flashed into my mind that if you were attempting to do a bank raid or some indiscretion, if you use the internet, you'll probably get the answer in half a second rather than having to wait and wait. No amount of enterprise is lacking here. And when it was reprinted, not in Italian, but in Italy. There is an unorthodox openings, don't know what to call it, bureau, center, something like that. And they contacted me and said, can we reprint your book? And I thought, well, do you want to? I mean, but they did. And I also, this book went to 3 printings. And I could have gone to a 4th and perhaps charged a few pounds for it, but I didn't. I stopped at 3, and I didn't receive any money for it. All of them were given away gratis. I think that really, to be honest, that's the best way to do amateur things, just to do it for the love of it. There we are again. The bishop comes out. And this is notes by the late and much missed Otto Hardy. You can transpose into it via the center counter. And here's an example of that with the extremely imaginative Soviet IM, Lutikov. He's playing against Karpov, who by then was world champion, and the golden boy, wasn't he? You can play d5 when after he takes, take with the queen, knight c3, pull it back to d6. Then you can play c6 and sort of make a sort of like a nest egg of the queen, like she sits there like Lady Mark, and you can dance around her, and it's a bit like a line in the Alekhine. And by transposition, it's exactly like the Alekhine line. The trouble with a book like this, and even I fell into this trap, and I knew in advance it would happen, is that you get so pathetically grateful if you see a reference to game and you've actually heard of some of the players. Petrosian played this system against, I think it was Boleslavsky, but the point was it was a training tournament. It wasn't prior to playing Botvinnik. And it was quoted that, Petrosian had played it, it must be named after him. I don't think that is appropriate. So I haven't renamed it. The name of this book is Loss of Time and Space. The next book is called 30 Years of Chess Book Reviews, and it's self-explanatory. Check Press for Details is the subtitle. And basically, it did go wrong in the printing. Unfortunately, it was my own fault. I didn't. The paragraphing goes wrong in loads of places. I didn't print it out. I did print it out, but I didn't print it out correctly. It's got little thumbnails of the book and fairly detailed write-up of the pages and the size of them and what potential buyers, possible buyers, can anticipate. And it's got books by Alekhine and Ludek Pachman, and a book about Alekhine Simmel in England. He came before and after the First World War. And the wonderful book Hastings 1895, which I gave 3 smiley faces to in the manner of the Myers Bulletin that used to award that. And this is copies of my reviews from various publications like Correspondence Chess or Basingstoke Gazette or Surrey Enhanced News. and things I edited in the 1970s and 80s, mostly 80s, I think. There's a book on Fisher's Games, one about Vishy Anand, and the New Zealand correspondence tournament. There we are, look. You see it, the little thing in pink. So in a way, the book wrote itself, except not. And the cover is done in sort of silver grey. There we go. Now, the last book I wrote was the hardest work, and it's the one that got the least praise. It is a biography of Peter Clarke. Now, the name Peter Clarke is fairly common in, I'm sure, many walks of life, but P.H. Clarke in the world of chess is pretty well known, isn't he? Peter was, for a short while, the number 2 player in England behind Jonathan Penrose. He sort of overtook Hugh Alexander and Harry Golombek, who were sculling around the top boards for England, if only because they're far more experienced. And in those days, there weren't the ratings. There were grades and there were championships. Let's not knock it or denigrate it in any way. But I think it important to say that now you get ratings every move or something. But in those days you didn't. You got an annual grade, and that was more or less it. And even that wouldn't necessarily guarantee you anything. This is it's called The Modest Master of Morwenstow, and I'm told that possibly I shouldn't have called it that. I gave it, being me, I gave it an astronomical amount of thought. And Morwenstow was where Peter lived, in Chapel House, which is up on the cliffs, I think. I never went there, and I never met him after I started writing the book. I wrote to him on his 70th birthday and said, "I read that book about you." And I used existing sources, but I also contacted Bernard Cafferty and John Littlewood and Paul Beelby, who paid me the highest compliment of saying he was going to take his wife right the way, he's from Scarborough, I think, right the way down to Morwenstow, which is on the Devon-Cornwall coast. This contains 72 games by Peter. Including in the notes additional games. I got some criticism for that, got people calling it informational dump. Well, informational dump this. They weren't dumped. They were put there because I considered them to be either relevant, interesting, or just old-fashioned unusual. Some of these games have been analysed very deeply in other books, and you can bet your boots that I found those other books and did my best to, not necessarily simplify, but transcribed such information across into my little booklet. And there was very little which I would have overlooked. I quote nearly 50 books which had stuff in there by Peter. Since this time there's 3 or 4, probably more. And I must have looked through hundreds and hundreds of magazines, including some, I have to say, quite uninspiring ones. Peter was very prone to all his life. He was a very nervous player, really. So even when he was playing postally, I think he was probably on the edge of thinking, well, it would be nice if this game was over. He wanted to win. He was competitive, but I wouldn't have said that was his chief motivation. He wanted to play correctly, and in that respect, I think he did. He wrote books on Petrosian and Tal; those are his main ones. He did do other things, and they're all written about in this book. That's the volume with the 72 games in it. This has the introduction. It also has additional information about his early life. And I also do a list of symbols and some explanation. And cross tables. Let me just show you various events. I've got extra information now which didn't go in here, which if I ever do another edition, I very much like to, will go in. Peter carried on playing right rounds until 1982, I think. He won the West of England Championships, which he didn't always do. I think when it came to quite near to me, I went to see it in Winchester. And I still sometimes go past the hall where it was held. And I just look across and think, oh, you know, we won't have that. The West of England Championship has been in Devon for so long. And I just think, you know, Hampshire is part of that. And yet they don't come up to us. We had a championships in Basingstoke Chess Club, controlled by Ian Stenhouse about 25 years ago. And it was so strong, I just can't tell you. I mean, I don't know, I think we had about, I just can't tell you how many players over 180 we had in it. Anyway, that was a long time ago, and it's nothing to do with Peter Clark. I just found myself there's some more cross tables here. Going off at the usual tangent. There we are. Here's the game between Peter and Donna, Hein Donna of Holland, of the Netherlands, please excuse me. I spoke to Gerard Welling about this, who went to the National Library in The Hague because he said all the databases were wrong. And he quotes very carefully. He gives me the correct move order. It was only a question of a transposition, I think. And I managed to expand what he said and provide really quite detailed notes. So there we are. And I don't think anybody looking through this would feel shortchanged. Game against the late Steve Shuttler. Peter himself has passed away as well, of course, sadly. And here he is, runner-up to Malcolm Barker, who was to be England's silver medalist in the very first World Junior Championship. And thousands of years later, Paul Georgiou caught up with him, and he'd been playing golf to a very high standard. He won the over 70s left-handed golf championships. It's hard to believe there is such a thing, but there is such a thing. And he was pleased to respond, but he said, I wasn't really, a lot of smoking, he said, and I didn't really like chess after a while, the environment. I don't think he found it hostile, but for a young man, perhaps he felt a little bit out of it, and there were other things to do. So having come second in the World Junior, he retired soon afterwards. And, well, what can you do but say that we lost a good player in Malcolm Barker, but we got a good player in Peter Clark. And by goodness, as controller and author and translator and player and county top board for Cornwall, he was a good player. He gave a lot. He gave a lot. Here is the indexes. I did some research in how to do those, and in the end I managed to get some work as well as editing for the British Chess Magazine, doing indexes as well. Well, there you are. That's the 3 books I've written. I suppose I'm fairly proud of those. I was going to write a book about Penrose, but it proved too difficult. I was going to write a book about Basman, but unfortunately for personal reasons was unable to continue. And recently I've done these blogs, but nothing very much else. Thank you very much for listening. I've been James Pratt, and this has been Chess Comedy Books 51.